Hello everyone, I am Abdul Muiz Ahmad and today we are going to continue off with our second chapter of the textbook, that is personal identity. And we would be starting off with the second part, that is part number 2.2, which would be dealing with different methods of determination of personal identity. So let's start. We have only got one learning objective this time, that at the end of this lecture you would be able to explain different methods of determination of personal identity. Means you would be explaining the different methods or different ways to establish the identity of a person, that those methods can be used to establish the identity of a person. So the first question that should come into your mind is that how many methods are actually there. So there are three methods of determination of personal identity, and these methods are picked or utilized as per the circumstances of the case. Alright, whatever the situation is presented to you, whatever the case is presented to you, whatever the circumstances are there, so according to that, out of three methods, one method is utilized, one method is employed. Okay, so how many methods are there? There are three methods. And what are these methods? What are the names? The first method is our third party method, second one is subjective method, and third one is your objective method. We would be explaining each of these one by one in detail later on, but for now you need to remember that how many methods are there and what are their names. So there are three methods and the names are: first one is third party method, second one is the subjective method, and third one is objective method. Alright, so let's just quickly move on to the first method, that is the third party method. Who is a third party? What is third party? These are the questions that must be running in your mind, that what is or who is a third party. So in, just take an example, just build up a scenario in your mind that a dead body is brought to you for examination. All right, and in this case there are three parties. Okay, the first party is always the examinee, sorry, is always the examiner, not the examinee, examiner, the person who is examining. For example, if police is examining, so police would be the first party. If you are examining, that is a medical legal officer examining, so that examiner would be the first party, first person, first party. Second person or second party is the one who is being examined, the examinee. All right, for example, in this case the dead body is being examined, so that dead body or the dead person is the second party or the second person. So first party is the examiner, second party is the examinee, and third party is the one who is accompanying the examinee. For example, a friend or a relative or an acquaintance is bringing the dead body, so alongside, so that friend or that acquaintance or that relative would be classified or would be categorized as third party. This friend or this relative or this acquaintance is basically asked various questions to help establish the personal identity. All right, so this is the most commonly used method, and this third party, you should know, refers to accompanying relative, friend, or acquaintance with the examinee. And in this method, personal identity of the examinee is established by the relative or friend who can help verify many parameters of the identity like name, CNIC, blood group, etc. So this is all about third party method. Most commonly used method, first point. Second point, what is or who is third party, and third point, that how is this method used, or how this method is carried, how is this method carried out. So you should know all these points about third party method. Now moving forward to the subjective method. What happens in subjective method is that you collect morphological data of the examinee, or you collect every sort of data of the examinee, like description of the physical characters of the body, like of height, weight, etc. You collect data regarding the belongings which are present with the person, like of wristwatch, cap, spectacles, etc. So again, in a case where a dead body is brought and there is no friend, there is no relative, there is no acquaintance, third party is absent, so you won't be using third party in that case. All right, you would be using the subjective method. And what you do, you write down and note down every data related to the examinee, related to the dead body. Okay, you note down its height, you note down its weight, you note down color of its cap. Okay, and you note down about its wristwatch, you note down about its spectacle, whether the person was long sighted or short sighted. Okay, what is the power of the spectacle, so you note down each and every point. Okay, so this method comes into play when the third party is absent. Third party is the most commonly used method, so that's why it's number one. And second number is a subjective method. Second method is a subjective method. So in order to ease this collection of data, four parameters have been created that are employed in this method. Alright, these parameters include anatomical parameters, physiological parameters, pathological parameters, and genetic parameter. So you need to remember the name and detail of these four parameters. Number one is anatomical parameter, second one is your physiological parameter, third one is your pathological parameter, and fourth one is a genetic parameter. So till now what we have covered, that subjective method comes into play when third party is absent, when third party is not there, so we use subjective method. Secondly, what happens in subjective method, that we collect morphological data or data of the examinee, like of its description of its physical characters and of belongings as well. And just to ease the collection of data, four parameters have been created, and they are used to cover up the entire subjective method of personal identification, for establishment of identification of a person. So these parameters, again I am reiterating again and again, these include number one, anatomical parameter, physiological parameter, pathological parameter, and genetic parameter. All right, so let's just go into the detail of these parameters. So anatomical parameter, as the name is giving away its answer, that anatomy means structure. Okay, so we would be collecting details or description about the shape of the body, design of various component parts, okay, structure, size, shape, everything related to the person. We would be collecting that information. All right, and anatomical parameter is further divided into primary anatomical parameter and secondary anatomical parameters. Primary anatomical parameters are those which are present since the time of birth, okay, which are present since the time of birth, and these include like facial features, okay. And secondary anatomical parameters are those which develop subsequently later stages of life, like secondary sexual characteristics are not present since the time of birth. All right, so they are categorized or classified as secondary anatomical parameters, okay. And degenerative changes like cataracts or arcus senilis, these don't develop, or these are not present since the time of birth. All right, they develop later, in later stages of life. So these are these would be classified as secondary anatomical parameters. So in anatomical parameters, we have got primary anatomical parameters and secondary anatomical parameters. Primary anatomical parameters are present since the time of birth, while secondary anatomical parameters develop later in later stages of life. All right, and example of primary anatomical parameter include facial features, and example of secondary anatomical parameter include secondary sexual characteristics. All right, so it's pretty much easy to explain, to remember what are anatomical parameters: shape, size, structure, and what are its two types: primary, with you since your birth, and secondary, develop later on. That's it. Moving on to the second parameter, that is physiological parameter. Again, you already know physiology means functional, so it includes functional parameters of the person like manner of gait, that is walking, voice and tone, manner of speech, etc. So that would be included under the heading of physiological parameters. Then you have got pathological parameters. So pathology means diseases, but you need to remember that specifically what sort of diseases are included under this heading. So it includes contracted diseases like that of eczema and their remnants as well. Like if a person has scars, or if a person has calcified fibroid or a keloid, that would be that would be categorized or classified as being a pathological parameter. Okay, that detail would be classified as being that of pathological parameter. So pathological parameter include contracted diseases. All right, and lastly we have got genetic parameters. Genetic parameters include blood groups and it's certain inherited morphological characteristics like that of bar bodies. All right, what are bar bodies? Female basically inherits two X chromosomes, two X sex chromosomes, right? And one of them goes under the process of lionization, that is inactivation, and forms a bar body. All right, so if a bar body is present, so that would be more convincing evidence towards the establishment of identity of a female. All right, so genetic parameter include blood groups and inherited morphological characteristics, if any, like that of bar bodies. All right, so we have got four parameters: anatomical, size, shape, structure, further divided into two Primary, secondary. Primary with you since your birth, like facial features. Secondary, develop subsequently later stages of life, like secondary sexual characteristics. Second, physiological parameters, functional parameters like gait, voice. Pathological parameters, contracted diseases like eczema. And genetic parameters like blood groups and inherited morphological characteristics like bar bodies. So this sums up the parameters which are employed in subjective method of determining personal identity, and this sums up the subjective method as well. So up till now we have covered third party method and the subjective method and its parameters as well. All right, now moving forward to the last method, that is the objective method. So in objective method, measurements are there. All right, you are collecting data, but these measurements are used to isolate an individual specific identity, an individual specific clue or character that could lead to establishment of the entire person identity. So you don't need to collect data regarding each and everything. You try to isolate an information that could help to establish the entire identity of the person. All right, for example, if you find out that the person is the fattest one, of the person is the shortest one, if the person is the tallest one in the class, so you don't require additional characteristics. Okay, you don't even require facial characteristic for the recognition of the person. You just require just one info, and that one info would be helpful to establish the entire identity of the person. So in objective method, measurements are there, but individual specific identity clue or character is also there that you need to remember. All right, so this method is useful when decomposed or mutilated remains are found. Okay, they lack facial identity, so you can't do subjective identification. All right, and there is no third party as well. For example, if for like years after there is some sort of excavation going on and certain body is found, remains of a dead person is found. Okay, so in that case there would be no third party obviously, so you can't employ the third party method. Okay, there is a lack of facial identity, so an essential part of subjective identification is also unavailable, so you go for objective method. You try to collect as much data as possible, and you try to isolate an individual specific identity in this case. All right, and just to sum it up, for this purpose of for objective method, the remains that are found are basically sorted into two groups. One is your biological materials, and second one is the non-biological materials. For biological materials, the name is giving away the answer again, that biological materials are those that would include living tissues, but you need to search and isolate those tissues that resist or do not putrefy. Okay, because if you collect those that easily putrefy, so they will putrefy later on, and and you won't be able to use them. All right, so you need to collect, search and isolate those tissues that resist or do not putrefy, like of hairs, nails, and bones. Okay, and non-biological material include those materials that are non-living, like if a dead person, okay, or if the remains is having some wristwatch attached. Okay, or if the dead person is wearing any clothes, so you would collect that. So these include clothes and other belongings. So this is all about the methods of determination of personal identity. I will just sum it up. Firstly, you have got three methods. You need to remember there are three methods. First one is a third party method, then is a subjective method, then is a objective method. Third party method is the one in which the accompanying relative, friend, or acquaintance would help you to establish the identity of the person by verifying the information. All right. Subjective method is the one in which you collect morphological data. There are four parameters: anatomical, divided into two: primary, secondary. Second one is a physiological, third one is a pathological, and fourth one is a genetic parameter. Okay, and lastly you have got objective method in which you do measurements, but you try to isolate an individual specific identity. All right, so this is all about the methods of determination of personal identity. If you have any comments, if you have any query, you can type in the comment box, and that's all about it. Thank you so much. Take care. Goodbye.